Well, we're off to the bamboo forest and the magical waterfall for another reading. It's a little overcast today, but that won't dampen our spirits. It's a wonderful little winding lane here all the way to the waterfall. Kalimera Philamu. Good morning, my friends. Well, here I am once again in the wonderful bamboo forest with the little waterfall ahead of me. I promised you another reading from my children's tale, the story of the grumpy old man Walter Whippet, the bamboo forest and the little tribe of red pixies. So, without further ado, let's settle down beside this waterfall. Well, here we are at the magic waterfall in the bamboo forest, and I'm about to read you the second chapter of my children's tale. As I said before, this is just a bit of fun for me while I'm waiting for my novel to be published. But if you've seen the first video, then this follows on. And Walter Whippet has been wandering through the bamboo forest and stumbles upon a tribe of little red pixies. So if you're sitting comfortably, then I'll begin. What the? Walter cried, rubbing his eyes. The tiny tribe stopped immediately and turned, their eyes equally wide. There was a moment or two of silence whilst Walter and the little people looked at one another in disbelief. Suddenly, there was complete and utter pandemonium. Walter screamed and the little people screamed too, each of them thoroughly shocked and stunned to see the other. Walter immediately froze on the spot in a state of shock, while the pint-sized pixie people frantically snatched up their tiny spears. "Bigfoot!" the little chief yelled at the top of his tiny voice, before hurling his spear at Walter, a spear no bigger than a toothpick. The others then followed suit, and although their spears were tiny, they were as sharp as a needle. "Ouch, ouch, ow, ow!" Walter cried, turning to leave as fast as his legs could possibly carry him. The village chief sounded the alarm through the horn that hung around his neck, summoning 100 or more of his tiny pixie tribe from the bamboo forest. Soon Walter was being pursued by an army of little people, each and every one of them as red can be and armed to their tiny teeth. The bamboo became so dense that Walter could go no further. "Please, please stop!" he cried, ducking and dodging their tiny spears. The little chief suddenly raised a hand. "It speaks!" he called to his tiny tribe. "The Bigfoot speaks!" "Bigfoot?" Walter replied, plucking several spears from his bottom. "I'm not a blasted Bigfoot!" The entire tribe pointed a finger. "It speaks!" they yelled. "The beast speaks!" "Beast?" Walter said, looking himself up and down. "I'm no beast, or a blasted Bigfoot for that matter." "Not a beast?" the chief said, scratching his grubby little head. "Or a Bigfoot?" a fellow pixie added. "No," Walter replied. "I'm Walter Whippet, retired librarian and stamp collector, and I haven't the foggiest idea where I am, or what on earth I'm doing talking to a bunch of little red gnomes for that matter." "Gnomes?" the chief growled. "We are not gnomes. We are bamboozy warriors, I'll have you know, feared throughout the land for our ferocious ferocity." His fellow bamboozy bared their tiny teeth and growled at Walter with as much ferocious ferocity as they could muster. "Bamboozy?" Walter said, never having heard of such a tribe. They looked fearless and ferocious, all right. All but one little fellow, that is, whose tiny bearskin pants were stretched tight around his bulging bamboosy belly. He sat munching and crunching, slurping and burping as he ate a slice of pie. A red berry pie, to be precise. In fact, this tiny bamboosy tribe lived on a diet of red berries and red berries alone. They ate red berry broth and red berry pie, red berry pancakes piled so high, drank red berry beer and red berry wine, and ate red berry jelly all of the time. The bamboosy tribe ate so many rosy red berries from the nearby bushes that they themselves have been permanently stained from their ruby red heads to their ruby red feet. The bamboosy chief prodded Walter with the tip of his spear once again. "Are you sure you're not a Bigfoot?" he asked menacingly. "Only the last Bigfoot that came this way ate 3 of my bamboosy brothers, I'll have you know." A pixie beside him raised a tiny hand. "And my sister," he called out. "And my great uncle," said another. "And my second cousin," said another, until the entire tribe were raising their tiny hands. The bamboosy chief stamped his little red foot to silence the villagers. Yes, yes, all right. I think we made our point," he snapped, turning to Walter once again. "So, if you are a Bigfoot and you're planning to have your fill with us," he said, raising his spear menacingly, "I'm warning you, we'll not go down without a fearless, ferocious fight. Do you hear?" 150 tiny spears were thrust in Walter's direction. Grrr! The bamboosy snarled, with ferocious ferocity indeed. "No, no, no, I'm not, I promise," Walter pleaded, whilst his stomach still rumbled. "But, I couldn't trouble you for a slice of that delicious pie, could I?" he asked the greedy bamboosy warrior. "Pie?" the plump little red pixie said, tucking it behind his back. "What pie? We have no pie. I don't know what you're talking about." The chief stamped his little red foot once again to summon an emergency meeting of the bamboosy tribe. "Now look here," he whispered. "If we fill this giant with pie, he won't want to eat us, will he?" "Or our sisters," a fellow pixie said. "Or our great uncles," said another. "Or our second cousins," said another. "Or our second cousin's great uncle," said another. "Or our second cousin's great uncle's sister," said another, until every pixie in the village raised a little red hand. The little chief growled and stamped his little red foot once again. "Yes, yes, all right," he snapped. "Fetch the wretched pies, will you? And feed the giant until he's good and full. And even when he's good and full, feed him some more, you hear?" "Well," he then said when the bamboosies stood scratching their scruffy heads, "what are you waiting for?" The tiny tribe ran around the village in all directions, in and out of their bamboosy huts, gathering all the red berry pies they could possibly carry. 450 tiny red berry pies, to be precise. "Here we are, giant," the chief proudly said when the pies were laid at Walter's enormous feet. "There's plenty more where that came from. Just don't eat us, you hear?" "Or our sisters," a bamboosy warrior called. "Or our great uncles," called another. "Or our second cousin's great uncle's sister," called another, until the little red chief stamped both of his little red feet. All right, he positively raged. "Once again, I think we made our point." Walter stooped and shoveled the tiny red pies into his mouth, 20 at a time. Oh yes, delicious, delicious, absolutely delightfully delicious," he said, as a little red bamboosy tribe stood watching with their eyes wide until 450 pies had been eaten. Walter burped and licked his lips and his fingers and his thumbs, which were now as red as the tiny tribe that surrounded him. "I must say," he said, with a full and bloated belly, "I couldn't eat another thing." The tiny pixie tribe rejoiced, dancing a merry jig around their fire. They were safe from the giant, and their sisters were safe too, and their great uncles, and their second cousins, even their second cousin's great uncle's sisters, were safe too. for that matter. Whilst the Bamboozle tribe danced and danced about their campfire, delighted at not having been eaten by the giant, Walter sat and laughed at their ridiculous bobbing and bouncing on one foot and then the other, wiggling their bamboozle bottoms at the roaring fire. The greedy little warrior, with his bulging belly, wiggled and wiggled closer and closer to the campfire until a flickering flame set his bearskin pants ablaze. "Oh no! Oh no! Oh no!" he suddenly shrieked, dashing this way and that about the village, whilst the rest of the Bamboozle tribe fell about laughing. Walter howled with laughter too, as the greedy little man in his burning bamboozle bottom ran around and around in circles until he leapt headfirst into a brimming barrel of redberry beer, which bubbled, boiled and hissed with steam until the little red man surfaced and clambered out. He stomped and squelched back to his bamboo hut, with his little red bottom now visible through the hole in his blackened and burnt bearskin pants, while the chief and the others rolled around the forest floor in fits of hysterical laughter. Suddenly, a distant rumble wiped the smiles from their little red faces, and they leapt to their tiny feet, turning this way and that, and then that way and this. "What is it?" Walter asked. "Bigfoot!" the pixie chief shrieked. "There's a Bigfoot coming!" "Bigfoot?" Walter scoffed. "Don't be ridiculous. There's no such thing as a Bigfoot. That's all hot air and hogwash. That's what it is. Hot air and hogwash. A fabricated figment of the imagination. And I, for one, will not believe a word of it. Not a word." But no sooner had those words left his lips, the distant rumble was accompanied by an almighty roar. A roar that had the hairs on the back of Walter's neck standing on end. "What was that?" he asked, as the colour slowly drained from his face. The tiny Bamboozle tribe looked at one another. "Bigfoot! Bigfoot! Bigfoot!" they shrieked, dashing about in all directions, bumping into one another in a state of complete and utter panic. "Wait!" Walter said, deeply concerned now. "You don't honestly expect me to believe that there was a Bigfoot roaming around this bamboo kingdom of yours, do you?" he asked. The tiny tribe were now hysterical, ducking and diving into their bamboo huts before disappearing underground through tiny trapdoors, slamming them firmly shut behind them. The rumbling and roaring grew louder and louder and louder still. "Hello!" Walter called to the Bamboozle as a shiver ran down his spine. "Blast!" he then cursed, turning this way and that. "Blast, blast and double blast!" The chief's little red head then popped up from the forest floor. "If you don't want to be a Bigfoot's breakfast," he said, shaking like a leaf, "then I suggest you run and hide. Run, giant! Run for your life!" With this, he disappeared underground once again. "Hide?" Walter said, looking at the tiny bamboo huts. "What do you mean hide? I'm a giant, remember? Where on earth am I supposed to hide?" The ground beneath Walter began to shake with the unmistakable thud of approaching footsteps. Big footsteps at that. The growling grew louder too. "Oh dear," he said, wishing he was back in his ransacked house with those mischievous mice. "Oh dear, dear, dear." Suddenly he felt the tip of a tiny spear prodding and poking at his bottom. "Ouch!" he shrieked, looking down to see the greedy little pixie cramming yet another redberry pie into his mouth. "Shh!" he said, tugging Walter's smelly sock. "Follow me," he added. "Hurry, giant, hurry!" He led Walter through the maze of bamboo, turning left and right, then right and left, then left and right and left, until he ducked behind a huge ragged rock. Walter ducked too, his heart beating like a big bass drum in his chest, while he sat shaking like a jelly on a plate. "Perhaps it's a bear," he thought to himself, rising ever so slowly to peep over the rock. What Walter Whippet saw that day stopped his heart for a second or two. "It's a Bigfoot, all right," he said, ducking quickly. "A really, 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 really Bigfoot." The mighty Bigfoot beast roared and growled as it approached the little village, towering high above the bamboo in its path, which it trampled with its enormous feet. It stood as tall as a dozen buses stacked one on top of the other, and was covered from head to toe in curly brown hair, just like a teddy bear, only far more menacing indeed. While its eyes were small and beady, its nose was truly humongous, all the better to sniff out a tasty treat from the surrounding forest. A little red bamboosy treat, to be precise. The Bigfoot licked its lips as its mighty belly rumbled, grumbled, and gurgled, desperate for its breakfast. Maybe a sister or two to start the day, followed by a great uncle and a second cousin for dessert, and maybe even a great uncle's sister's second cousin. Sniffing at the village huts with its enormous nose, the Bigfoot raised the biggest foot Walter Whippet had ever seen, and stamped on each and every one of the tiny houses in an attempt to drive out the little people. But they were safe underground, although the forest shook violently above them. The hungry Bigfoot roared and beat its mighty chest, a roar so loud it could be heard in outer space, in fact. Walter covered his ears, but breathed a huge sigh of relief when the beast suddenly turned to leave. Until, that is, the Bigfoot suddenly stopped and sniffed once again, picking up the scent of the greedy bamboosy warrior at Walter's feet. The Bigfoot licked its lips once again and turned with a menacing look in its beady eyes, stomping and stamping towards the ragged rock. Blast! Walter cursed once again. Blast, blast, and double blast! He looked down to see the greedy little warrior muttering a pixie prayer, with a mouthful of red berry pie, of course. As an old man, Walter would have run away and left the petrified pixie to fend for himself. But ever since his dip in the marvellous, miraculous, and altogether magical waterfall, he had been overcome with a newfound bravery. In a flash, Walter snatched the remaining red berry pie from the greedy bamboosy warrior and smeared his face and hands until he looked just like him, only much bigger and a far tastier treat indeed for a hungry Bigfoot. "Hey, that's my pie!" the little pixie moaned. But Walter had a plan. "Hey, hey!" he suddenly yelled, leaping from behind the rock to attract the Bigfoot's attention. "Over here! Hey, Big Nose! Over here!" The Bigfoot's beady eyes widened when it saw the tastiest treat of all. It growled and howled and growled and howled once again as it lumbered towards Walter, trampling and flattening everything in its path. "Stay here," Walter told the bamboosy warrior as he set off through the bamboosy forest, leading the Bigfoot away from the tiny tribe. Well, that's chapter 2 of the tale of Walter Whippet, and the magic waterfall, the bamboo forest, and the tiny pixie tribe. I hope you enjoyed that, and I'll come back to this waterfall shortly with chapter 3. Bless you all.